We'll get started. Some other folks will come in, I'm sure, but jobs to be done is a pretty broad framework. Yes, it did come out of business thinking about understanding your markets, and of course, that really means understanding human behavior. So we like to think about jobs to be done as a broad discovery framework to really understand human behavior, and very often we talk about it in commercial terms with the word customer, but that could really be anybody that you're serving, right? Working with a nonprofit right now. I've worked with educational institutions. And when we talk about customers, that's citizens and that's students and things like that. And jobs to be done can really help us think through lots of different situations that go beyond just commercial understanding of human behavior. And with that, we're going to kick off this episode of Jobs to Be Done Untangled with me, Jim Callback, author of the Jobs to Be Done Playbook and co-founder of the Jobs to Be Done Toolkit, along with Elaine.
Hey everyone, I'm Elaine. I think most of you know me by this point. Greetings. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm dialing in from Zurich today. I'm actually at Venbridge Partners office, so that's really exciting to have that kind of crossover with jobs to be done on both sides of the Atlantic. If you're not familiar with Venbridge, folks, Beat and Jan, they're wonderful practitioners, really talented psychologists and consumer behavior specialists. So I appreciate that they hosted me
And we've
today.
had them on the show at least twice, if not three
Yes.
times. Yeah, so
Yeah,
they've been
and
here in
yeah,
the past.
Jan and Jim actually co-authored an academic study together.
Yeah.
Yeah, Stepstone. Just a couple of quick announcements. We have our video learning course, Foundations of Jobs to be Done. It's what we like to say the fastest, easiest, quickest way to get started with the entire framework from beginning to end. We cover all of the basics and talk about how you can use it internally in your own work. We also have our upcoming Applying the Core Process workshop happening June 8th, 10th, and 12th. So that will basically walk you through a series of activities over 6 hours where we help you practice the entire process from a very high level, just going from beginning, kind of scoping the job all the way through to activating the information internally on your own projects. Jim offers team coaching. He's a great person just to you can have him come in for a block of hours, have him come in for an hour, look at the work you're doing, get some guidance. Really excellent way to kind of keep your projects on track or reinvigorate things if you're feeling a little bit stuck. And lastly, we will be back the last Tuesday of June for our next Untangled. And I believe we have Alex Cottrell
We do
dialing
have Alex. I
in
just
London.
talked to
Yeah.
Alex yesterday. He's going to be talking about tying insights, particularly jobs to be done insights, but any insight to product development and product management. I'm looking at UCK. This is going to be a great episode where he has a lot that will help your team over there at Huntington Bank.
Right. Now let's introduce our special
Yes,
guest.
Tanya,
Oh,
welcome, welcome. I'm excited about today.
yeah, me too. Tanya is so talented. Tanya has a background in deep tech, I believe a PhD in physics, an MBA in business. So really a sweet spot in dealing with like the complexities on like another almost like quantum level complexities, right? Probably using all of the words wrong there, but you get the idea. This is hard stuff that Tanya's going to help us understand a little bit more about how she works in that space and give us some thoughts on what we can do when we're facing that, our own levels of complexity. So welcome, Tanya.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I guess, should I share my
Yeah.
Yeah.
screen?
And
Yeah,
I don't know if you have some slides there, but we'd love to hear a
I
little bit
do.
about yourself
Yes.
up front. Okay, great.
I have several slides I prepared. So, um, can you all see that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you so much for the invitation. As Elaine said, my name is Tanya Ramond. I am the CEO of Sapien Consulting, my own consulting group or company. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all. Last summer, I got to know Jim and Elaine by taking the Jobs to be Done Toolkit short course, I believe it was. Um, and um, and it was a fantastic experience and I learned a ton and I just absolutely love the framework. I knew about jobs to be done beforehand, tangentially anyway, but the short course really gave me really grounded me in the methodology. And so just to start off from what Jim had said at the beginning about thinking about jobs to be done as a method of understanding human behavior, I think, and trying to avoid the word customer, I think a lot of, and I'll give you some perspectives here from my world, but a lot of technical people go into to being technical people because they want to avoid dealing with other people essentially, and then they decide, okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to start a company, and then it's like, well, yeah, actually you have to start talking to people. But the psychographic part of things can sometimes be intimidating, and so I'll talk a little bit about why jobs to be done can be maybe a less intimidating tool for that mindset. So a little bit, I'll start off with a little bit about me so you understand my perspective. And please feel free to interrupt. This is really informal. Happy to answer any questions along the way. So yeah, as Elaine mentioned, my formal training is very technical. I have a PhD and a postdoc in what we call now quantum physics. We didn't call it quantum before when I got my PhD. Now quantum is a sexy word and we use it all the time. So yeah, I'll go with quantum physics um, at the University of Colorado and the National Institute for Standards and Technology. And so I'm still here in the Denver area. And then after my postdoc, I decided, no, I don't want to be an academic. I don't want to be a professor. So I went into industry, and I spent 10 years at Ball Aerospace, if you know the company. And it was a fantastic period of time. I learned a ton, and specifically, I learned something called system engineering, which as well as engineering management and just the rigor of product development. How do you take a product and like from a technical standpoint, take it from, say, a prototype to an actual product you can put into mass production. And then for the purpose of this talk, I am going to talk a little bit about system engineering and explain what it is because it's relevant to jobs to be done. But after that point, I had a bit of a career reinvention in two different ways. My interest moved away from just purely technical roles to a business focus. And as Elaine mentioned, I earned an MBA from the University of Denver. And then also another career pivot along the way was my interests moved from large companies to the startup world, and I found myself in a series of 5 different startups in aerospace and quantum, and so which was certainly eye-opening and very interesting. It was also very, as the startup world tends to be, it was somewhat rocky. And after my 5th startup, I decided, okay, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to take my learnings from the trenches and apply it to my own consulting company. And so in 2022, I started Sapien Consulting, and I specialize in deep tech and quantum technology commercializations. In other words, taking these technologies out of a lab that may look like, say, a pizza box with wires sticking out of it, and changing it or putting it through its paces, both from a technical standpoint and from a business standpoint, to get it to market. And I like to say I help quantum and deep tech companies avoid the stellar science zero customers graveyard, which is actually prevalent. So today I'm still a consultant, but my main client is an organization called the Colorado Quantum Incubator, which is it's a facility that, as the name implies, it's for very, very early stage startups developing quantum technologies, offering them co-working space, but also lab space for their first say they just sprung out of a university, and this is kind of meant to be their first landing spot in the entrepreneurial world. Okay, so a little bit of an agenda, not to be too structured about it, but a couple of topics I want to go over. First of all, I've been mentioning this term deep tech, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what that means. So as well as system engineering, and I'll give you just a little bit about what is systems engineering, because it's pertinent to this conversation. And then in terms of aspects of jobs to be done that I think are particularly applicable to my world, I'll go through the concept of scoping out a job. I'll talk about formulation rules and how they help you with pulling out signal from the noise. I'll talk about this concept of granularity, which Jim and Elaine talked about a lot in the jobs to be done mini course. I'll talk about a concept called specifying the requirement and not the design, and then going after root cause and root cause analysis. Okay. So so to start off with, I want to say a little bit about what deep tech is, just so that you have a working understanding of it as we go on in this conversation. Deep tech, sometimes people refer to it as hard tech or frontier tech, and then a lot of people have these very pithy one-sentence descriptions of what deep tech is. I never feel like I can get it all into one sentence, so I'll explain it in terms of a couple different characteristics that that I would associate with deep tech. Deep tech is mostly, not exclusively, but the vast majority of it is hardware based, as opposed to, say, a SaaS kind of application. It's very intellectual property based. So IP is a big factors in pretty strongly here. Deep tech tends to be spun out of universities or research labs, so it's very research heavy, or at least at the start or at the base. And then especially because of the hardware component of all of this, it can take much longer. The timelines tend to be much longer to mature the tech. And there can be much higher capital expenditure. So if you think about something like SpaceX, for example, obviously it's going to take a lot longer and take a lot more money to build a rocket that's reusable than it is to, maybe code an app. So deep tech tends to be something you can't do on a laptop in a coffee shop, right? And so because of all this, this need for capital expenditure and the high risk that the fact that the technology may not be very mature to start off with, there's a very prominent role of government funding in deep tech. So some examples of deep tech areas are quantum technologies, optics and photonics, clean tech, aerospace, biotech and medical device, advanced materials and manufacturing, AI and machine learning in most contexts, and then robotics. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavor of this is the world I live in, this is where I come from, and it can, I like to say that there's definitely it's the same and it's different from, say, the SaaS world, the pure SaaS world. I mean, a lot of the principles still apply, but at the same time, it's very helpful to understand the perspective of the people who come from the deep tech world in order to adapt to the outlooks, the mindsets that everyone else has about the business world. Yeah. So, and I'll say that, the reason why I'm here is I do feel like the jobs to be done toolkit is particularly applicable to deep tech companies, and I'll talk a lot about that coming up. Oh yeah, and so then I promised that I would explain what system engineering is. So I'll do that again. I'll do that with a um, uh, kind of an analogy of how I think about system engineering. So taking a step back, I'm going to talk about an orchestra. Hopefully everyone here has at least been to an orchestra concert or at least has watched one and understands the basic concept here. And thinking about the orchestra conductor as well. So as you know, in an orchestra, you've got all the different sections. You've got the violins, you've got the violas, you've got the cellos, you've got the brass, you've got the woodwinds, right? So you can think of all these folks as subject matter experts. But who's pulling it all together, right? The conductor is the one that has this macro view of the music and the musicians. The conductor is the one that has this musical vision in their head for what the piece is supposed to sound like and communicates that to everyone in the orchestra. But the conductor is also the one that manages the interplay between the different sections. So the interfaces between the violins and the cello section, for example. And that helps them understand that, okay, the theme is here now, and then it gets handed over to this other section. So this interface has to be seamless. And yeah, just the mechanics of fitting all these different parts into the whole so it sounds like one beautiful piece of music and not just disjointed parts, right? Also pointing out that the conductor doesn't make a sound, right? Everyone else is the one that's making the sound here. And so the systems engineer has a very parallel role to the orchestra conductor. Systems engineering is a practice that was kind of developed by NASA in the 50s when they started doing these very large programs to say build a satellite and launch it into space. And it was formulated basically to deal with a very complex number of a very, very large, complex engineering team. So on an engineering team that you would get in an aerospace company, for example, you're going to have, again, all these different subject matter experts. So you're going to have mechanical engineers, you're going to have electrical engineers, you're going to have thermal engineers, you're going to have controls engineers. And the system engineer is the one that kind of serves as the conductor of the engineering group. They're the one that formulates and hands down requirements. And that's going to be an important point going forward here. But they're the one that understands the concept of what the customer wants this satellite to do. And then they have to translate it into what these subsystems have to execute on in order to make it work. The system engineer, like the conductor, manages those interfaces between specialists and is in charge of the mechanics of fitting all the parts into the whole again. And so, and just as the owner of that macro view. So what I want to focus on specifically in this presentation is this requirements aspect. System engineers are the ones who, the system engineering is a discipline that is, you have to be certified in it. You have to be trained in it. And a lot of it has to do with requirements formulation and requirements handling. And so I'll talk about how that resonates with jobs to be done here. Okay, so that's all the background stuff. So now I want to get into the jobs to be done specific stuff here. But yeah, so okay. The second topic I want to talk about is scoping out a job. And I don't know how many of you actually, Elaine, I don't know how many people here actually have taken the course that you guys gave, I'm sure you keep giving every year. But so if you took this course, you learned about the jobs to be done canvas, and the first step that you learned about was this process of scoping out a job. And so that means that you're determining what playing field you're going into and nailing that down. you're talking about who the job performer is that you want to focus on. And then you're talking about the focus job that that job performer does within that playing field. And sorry, so the first step, like I said, for the Jobs to be Done toolkit is this process of scoping out a job, looking at all the alternatives for what other playing fields are out there, what other job performers are out there, what other focus jobs could we do, and deciding on which one you want to focus on. And this is a very powerful step. I felt like, even though it's something where I think it took us an hour or two to learn how to do this stuff, and maybe would take a team about that long to really work through it and and scope out the problem. It's powerful because at the end of it, you arrive at what's called this unit of analysis, this job performer and focus job. By committing to a unit of analysis, you're committing to, you write that down, and it's a way to kind of push everything else out of your head and focus on the unit of analysis. Yeah, and so like I said, it's a way to say no to all the other possibilities. So it's also a way to acknowledge, hey, we've considered X, Y, and Z, but for now we're just gonna focus on Y. It's a way, as Jim says, to avoid being knocked off course. So in other words, and also I should say the whataboutism, that this is Jim's term from last year. It's people always come to you and say, well, what about this? What about that? Have you thought about all these other possibilities? Well, this scoping out is a way to know in your head, yes, we thought that through. We have a plan. We made a decision to not go that direction because we're going this other direction instead. Or yes, we can think about going that direction, but it's a different exercise and separate from what we're focusing on right now. The reason why this is so important it's important for everyone, but it really struck me because most technical people are super detail oriented and love to go down rabbit holes. Like they're trained to do this. And to be able to have something where you've gone through this exercise, you've committed, again, like I said, to the unit of analysis, and when something else comes up, you have this tool so that you don't have to be knocked off course. It's also super powerful because, again, if your unit of analysis is the job performer and the focus job, you're putting the emphasis on that end user and you're not talking about the technology at all. So if you can carry around this idea of the job performer and focus job, it gives you something to cling to that is independent of the technology. Because again, in a lot of, say, deep tech areas, you have people working in these areas who they got their PhD in this particular area, right? So they're like the world's expert on whatever the topic is. And so they're always thinking about that technology. They need something else in place so that they can not think about the technology, which is what we're trying to do here. So let's see. Okay, so that's that topic. I'll just pause here and ask if there are any questions. Okay. Okay, the third agenda item, if you will. I talked about system engineering and how requirements are a big part of a system engineer's training. What I'm showing you here is, this is just a screenshot from a course, an MIT course on the fundamentals of system engineering. So this is for people who are engineers who want to learn how to become system engineers. But what I thought was really cool about this is, if you read through this, it's a lot about, there's a lot of rigor around how you formulate requirements. And if you remember from the Jobs to be Done toolkits, requirements, the formulation rules are a really big part of how you work with the data that you get. while interviewing various people. But just to give you an idea, so not to dwell too much in any one bullet, but they have to be clear and consistent. They have to be correct, factually correct. They have to be feasible in the sense that they can't defy the laws of physics. There has to be some flexibility in the sense of you have to state what the requirement is and less about how you might actually fulfill the requirement. They have to be formulated without ambiguity. In other words, it should be there shouldn't be a question as to which of interpretation of that requirement. They have to be singular, so one actor, verb, object, which does sound familiar. And then they have to be verifiable. But yeah, so these clear rules about how to write requirements are very much like what we learned from the Jobs to be Done toolkit. And then also to give you another angle on this, in terms of the requirements and the taxonomies that go with it. This is another snapshot from the same source. What it's trying to show here is the hierarchy. So requirements always have these hierarchies, these taxonomies of requirements that go with them. And I'm not, don't want you to like dive into the exact every little box, but what I'm trying to get you to take away is like 3 separate sections of this flow down, if you will. The top level is the mission level requirements. So that's coming from the customer. Like the customer wants this satellite to do whatever it is at the very top level. And then the middle here are the system level requirements. So you take the mission level requirements and figure out from there what the overall spacecraft system has to be able to do to make that mission level requirement happen. And then the last part of this flow down is at the subsystem level, where you take the full system level requirements and then figure out what all the different subsystems have to be able to do in order to, again, flow up to that mission level concept. And so just knowing this, I went back to this one of the articles that Jim I can't remember if he wrote or had us read prior to the Jobs to be Done toolkit, but illustrating what I thought was very similar concept in the sense that, you know, any single requirement could go up in level of abstraction or go down in level of abstraction from, okay, you want to be happier at home. So that might mean you renovate your home. And part of that might be to mount an object to a wall. And then finally, that requires you to make a hole in the wall. So there's these different levels of abstraction there. Which one you focus on is, you have to decide that. But it reminded me of this concept that you have in any system engineering framework. Okay, so moving on to this concept of granularity of job steps. You know, a big part of what we learned from the Jobs to be Done toolkit was we have all this data that we're getting from people we interview. How do we take it and pull out, structure it so that we can pull out the signal that we're getting, the important information, the insights that we're getting from customers. And a lot of that has to do with granularity. So what does that mean? That means, so if you remember, when you're looking at figuring out your different job steps, right? You're taking the different stages of a job. So plan, prepare, execute, monitor, modify, and conclude. And then underneath each one of those, you're figuring out what the job steps are underneath that. And figuring all that out is a bit of an art, right? You have to ask yourself, okay, how granular do you make all your job steps? What is too small to count as a specific job step? Or when does a job step stage need to be split into component jobs. So we learned a lot around, well, you kind of try it out, and then you may have to go back and either group things together that needed to be that really needed to be grouped together because they're too granular on their own, or vice versa. Maybe there's a job that needs to be split up into sub jobs, and so figuring that out is important in order to ensure that you pull out the right amount of information from your raw data. And so the analogy here is a mathematical concept called a histogram. I'm sure a lot of you know what this is, but a histogram is basically just a way of displaying binned information. So in this example here, someone has done a survey of tree heights in, say, a forest, right? And so they're measuring the height of all the trees, and then they're instead of maybe plotting each one individually, they're binning it into these bins of, say, 50 centimeters at a time. So trees that are between 100 and 150 centimeters, 150 and 200, etc. And then so if a particular tree falls into that bin, you get one tally mark for that tree, and then you go on through the rest of your sample. And so then you get this histogram that shows that, okay, there's a lot of trees that are at between 250 and 300 centimeters in this particular sample. So it's a way to show data insights. But this figuring out the bin size, that level of granularity matters. Because in jobs to be done, you're effectively making a data histogram. So you need to get that bin size right to see patterns. So an example is, and forgive me if this is too graphic, but what I'm trying to illustrate here is that this is what you would get if your histogram, if you just had one bin. So in other words, all your data fell into one bin, you just get one data point. It doesn't really help you. On the other end extreme, this is a histogram with 500 bins. So basically each tree height is its own bin. And so things are starting to come together, but it's not a simple story. But okay, if now we have 10 bins, and so now you can see, oh, now there's a pattern. Now there's a conclusion to this story. There's some signal coming out of the noise here. And so really this is a Goldilocks problem where you have to get that bin size, not too small, not too big, but just right to get the right insight from your data. Okay. I'm going to keep trucking along. This next one is this phrase of specify the requirement, not the design. You hear this a lot in engineering. Specify the requirement, not the design. What does that mean? Requirements talk about the what and the why. What do you want to get done? Why do you want to get it done? It's supposed to reflect the user needs, the customer needs. The design is around the how. It has to do with the technical specifications. It has to do with how you may implement the code. It may have to do with how you design the system. But the idea here is that you want to say in the end what the thing is supposed to be doing, but you don't want to say how it's supposed to be doing it. And so if we get this a lot, you also see this in jobs to be done, because jobs to be done is fundamentally an outcome-based approach, right? We care less about we care less about what we care about is what the end behavior is. And this is seen by, again, going back to that unit of analysis where, in the end, we've got a job performer and we've got a focused job. And so what we care about is less about, what goes on under the surface there. We care about, okay, this particular job performer doing this particular focused job. Yeah. And this kind of ties into root, yeah. So So when I heard a lot around, okay, go back to that unit of analysis, the job performer, the focus job, and it was less around the psychographics maybe of that particular person or that job performer. It's more around, hey, we just need to know, these attendees just need to attend a conference, and as opposed to maybe more about their psychographics. Okay, last concept here, root cause analysis, and going after the why, some of the why aspects of behavior. This is a snapshot from a NASA document that I found that talks about root cause analysis. So root cause analysis is a formal process that you get in aerospace, for example. It's also, I mean, every scientist is trained inherently in root cause analysis because that's the nature of scientific research, which is you're always trying to understand why something is, why the behavior is happening that you observe. So, so yeah, so in an engineering context, it's more around, okay, I tested something out in the lab, or I did a a flight test and something went wrong. There was a failure. Okay, well, we have to do a root cause analysis to figure out why. Uh, and that just reminded me a lot about like all the why questions that we get answered in our job story. So we go through the jobs to be done toolkit. We figure out the aspirations of the job performer. We figure out what does success look like, right? And all of that gets wrapped up into this the job story. So, for example, when I am reviewing learnings from the conference and the large amount of notes is overwhelming, I want to be able to instantly, automatically, comprehensively parse out the key points in the story so that I can share insights with the team in an optimal way and feel confident to bring new techniques back to my team. And so all this all this hard work gets wrapped up into the job story that communicates the motivation of what uh, of this job performer doing the job that you focused on. And so that's a lot around the root cause analysis, where you've got, say you've got some behavior that you're trying to um, get on top of, and you've got the symptom, if you will, of the behaviors, but that's all coming from the causes that drive the behavior. Yeah, so that was all that I had prepared, and happy to take any questions.
I thank you, Tanya, so much. That was wonderful. I'm still particularly fascinated by using the histogram and sort of the way that you described the importance of getting those bins right. And I can point to Chris up there, and talk a little bit about that's one of the things that we've been working with his team on is they've gone through the process. We've shown them how they can use the canvas to kind of understand different approaches and in the process of exploration. But sometimes it's very easy to want to do, let's say, a canvas for, turning every focus job into a related job. And in the process of doing that, you kind of become the expert on that topic, but then how do you narrow it down to go back to focusing on that noise? And I think you did a really wonderful job explaining that. I'm
Good.
wondering if you have an example of like when you've worked on that with one of your clients, or maybe in the workshop that you led last summer. What does that look like in the deep space context? Kind of getting those bins.
I mean, from the application standpoint, I don't think it's that different from what it would be for anybody else. It's really a question of what, I mean, Jim talked about these levels of abstraction, right? If you're too far removed, and how you want to be one level of abstraction away from the things that you can control, right? I
Mhm.
mean, there's the tendency is to overanalyze everything. And it's like, well, that's great, but you're not getting a PhD in that subject. You're trying to build a product for a customer. And so what is it that your product can actually affect?
Mhm.
And it's um, bringing it back home to that
Mhm.
um, kind of that's filters out some of that other noise about, yeah, I don't care about, how you derive this particular equation to do this thing. That makes no difference. What we're trying to figure out here is, again, that level of abstract, the job that needs to be performed, the level of abstraction that is maybe 1 degree away from that, and what feeds into that specifically.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. It does. And I think the way that you described it, where, you want to be one level of abstraction away from the things you control, that's, I think, such a powerful quote from today's conversation, because it's true, like that it's very easy, even if you're not necessarily an expert, but somebody who's like really immersed in the research, to not know where to stop yourself. We have so many research tools available to us now that can give us this incredible level of depth on any topic that we want. And so how do you stop yourself, and how do you get the confidence to know that, like, this is, because to me,
Yeah,
that's often what I see, is that it becomes a confidence issue. Like, is this the right place to stop? Do I feel comfortable with the way that I framed the problem at this level? Do you see, what
yeah,
kind of behaviors or struggles do you see with some of the people that you work with?
yeah. And that's not my quote, that's Jim's.
No.
Um, but yes, um, yeah, absolutely.
Do the entrepreneurs that you work with struggle to kind of maintain that more like focused
Oh
perspective?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
yeah, it's I mean, I do a lot of like coaching of entrepreneurs, and it's especially when they're first starting out, it's a constant battle
Mhm.
just to it's because it's really a paradigm shift from I gotta chase every little detail down because that's what I had to do in my PhD, and I was expected to do that, right? Versus no, you have to filter. Um, you have to start thinking about things from from a different perspective. Like I said, we're not talking about the technology anymore. We're talking about this unit of analysis. I mean, that's really why I love that phrase. Here's your unit of analysis. Come back to that unit of analysis. Job performer, job focus job. Let's just bring it back to that. And
Yeah.
I think it's super powerful. It seems really simple, but it's so hard to do.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
That's what I was thinking as you were going through everything,
yeah,
particularly with some of the comparisons you're doing between your work and what Jim and I have created in the course of our work. Looking at planning a conference next to like systems engineering requirement is kind of funny, but you're right. Like, you really
yeah,
see the patterns there in terms of like, I think that's one of the things that makes jobs to be done so powerful. And we don't talk about this a lot in our work, but that's really what Clayton Christensen was trying to do, looking at all of these different routes to successful innovation and distill it down into like the most elemental components. And I think that's why these comparisons between, fairly simple spaces and more complex spaces work so well, is because those elements are common.
yeah, yeah.
Also, if anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand, speak up, post it in the chat. Anything that you want to respond to or comment on, I could keep going. Brandon is saying, this presentation reminds him of the passage from the Book of Five Rings, where he wrote, "If you know the way broadly, you will see it in everything." Interesting. Do you want to, Brandon, maybe you could tell us a bit more about the context of that quote? It seems like some really excellent universal wisdom.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so as Tanya, as you were going through this presentation, I kept seeing like, a lot of the concepts that you were bringing up show that the job to be done methodology really isn't that new. It's like going on concepts that you brought in, like systems engineering. I mean, I know the concept, the principles are like mid-century, but I mean like the foundational patterns and like the architecture of how the jobs are laid out and the structure of job steps and desired outcomes. All that stuff is seems to be pretty rooted in a lot of the other systems engineering thinking that you were bringing here. And it just reminded me of this quote about if you know the way, um, if you know the way broadly, you'll see it in everything. Meaning, if you master something very deeply, you start to see the same principles at work in a lot of different other systems, just like pattern and sense making. And so this was a great example of seeing that, like, yeah, and how maybe how you experience your deep knowledge in this area, and then learning jobs methodology. It was like there's a lot of overlap and some principles that really applied. So I thought it was like really fascinating at that level.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know the book that you referred to, but I'll definitely take a look.
It's more like a philosophy book
Okay.
from a samurai in the like the 16th century. Uh, but it's interesting. It's about learning and applying those methods. Anyway,
Hmm.
it was resonant for me.
Yeah, I mean, right. That's that from that standpoint, sure, that is not a new, you know, concept at all, right? But it's just interesting that these different levels of abstraction can be applied in different frameworks, right? System engineering is a framework, jobs to be done is a framework. Um, and I also feel like, uh, part of the reason why tools like jobs to be done are so powerful is because for scientists, for example, when you're going through and you're doing your scientific work, okay, the laws of physics are really great because it's very clear, it's black and white, right? Uh, y- but you make that transition to, say, the business world where there's no laws of anything, right? Nothing's black and white. You're just like trying to make sense of all the everything. What do I do? You get overwhelmed, and that's why you need frameworks, right, to make sense of the world. And so you have tools like this that you have to rely on, or you should rely on, that can really help. And yeah, that's big part why I do that, because why I love this, because I have to train myself not to like go down rabbit holes too, like everyone. So
Yeah. It's hard, yeah, because sometimes, like, I know in my own practice with like creativity and innovation, it's like those unusual connections are like where the fun stuff happens. That's where the ideas start to emerge. And so it can be really challenging to say, like, I'm not going to make connections with this topic over here because, like, I need to stay focused here. And there's a fear that sort of emerges with that you're going to miss something or that you're doing the wrong thing. Um, I'm wondering if in some of this, do you see any biases that emerge with your clients?
yeah, I mean, yes, but it's kind of baked in a way, right? I think also going back to the scoping out a job part, that's a way to, even if you're going to be biased in the end towards, hey, I want to focus on a particular job, it also forces you to broaden the context and consider the rest of the context, and go through that exercise so that at least, even if you do acknowledge, hey, I'm just going to focus on this one particular job, it gets you to think about, well, um, you still have to think about all the other possible jobs or the possible job performers, possible playing fields. And so I think it is a good way to think through and maybe identify biases in that way, because it forces you to um, consider other viewpoints.
Yeah, I often find myself kind of referencing the yin and yang and suggesting that the market demands a balance. If you don't have that balance with the unmet needs, with, people who have a demand for what it is that you're offering, you're going to have a hard time finding the right fit. Although, since I've been doing some reading with Peter Drucker, he's talked me out of that a little bit, but I still think to some extent it applies when you're talking at a slightly more simplistic level. People understand, because when you're in a business and when you're doing the work, you're just so embedded in the business every day, thinking about the people that you're working with and the conversations that you're having. It can be so hard to even take a step back and think about, when we use these words, they might be very common in parlance, but in the business, they still have a very specific nuanced meaning, and you want to surface that as part of the conversation. Jobs to be done at least helps me kind of work through some of those biases. So it's like, even if we're talking about, I use financial planning a lot, it's one thing to be a consumer of financial planning and going out there and seeking out a retirement plan, but then it's a very different experience if you're inside the business talking about the financial planning software that you're building. They have two very substantially different meanings, I've found.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stop talking for a minute. Are there any other questions? Dom, we always would love to hear from you if you want to talk a little bit about levels of abstraction, granularity, some of your experience with statistics in this space.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love the talk, Tanya. In the Jim has a lot of stuff too in that hierarchy, of when you're moving up the hierarchy, you're asking why, and statistical, problem solving thing. You're trying to get to the root cause. You keep asking why, but you also move up the hierarchy as to, well, what are you trying to solve for? What are you trying to accomplish? But at some point you start to get to that, motherhood and apple pies, like everybody wants that, it's like, of course, that's going to override everything. It's, world peace, and solve hunger and
Right.
things. And it gets so big, right? Then you're too far up, too far away from job statements or things to test or create objectives out of. And then when you keep asking how and you're going down the hierarchy, you get into more detail of what it is, but sometimes it gets so granular, so small, right? It's not improving the histogram, the distribution look, right? Because you've broken it down far enough. You want to just go far enough that you can understand that distribution in a histogram, or understand the steps of a job without getting into how do people do it. You start getting into more of the technology and ways that people do it today because of what we have available today. Well, then you aren't thinking about the possibility of what you can innovate to solve for. You're just, reinventing something that is. And yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
I'm curious, Tanya, too, how do you start to fold the technology back in after you've done some of this analysis work?
Yeah, well, I mean, the technology would come in towards the end of the process, right? So say like the how might we statement, right? That's towards, I forget if it's step 5 or 6, but basically that's where, when you set up the how might we statement, that's kind of what your launch into the technology, right? And not before. So that's a trick, right? But yeah, I think you talk about you do all this work. There's the raw research, right? You go and talk to people, you collect the data, you parse the data using formulation rules, and then you come up with and then maybe you do surveys, and then after you figure out the unmet needs, then you pick a job story, and then from there you pick the how might we statement. It's the job story and the how might we statement that's kind of the tip of the iceberg, that underneath all that you had all that work, but then that's the part that you kind of launch out to the technical team to understand, that's what they need to know. They're on a need to know basis, and that's what they need to know, right? I mean, of course you can come back to the details if you need to, but by having that very clear direction, that kind of becomes if you will, that's kind of your your lower level requirement for the execution team, right? To figure out, well, what do we design that's going to address this? So it's a nice kind of delineation in that sense.
Yeah. I'm also curious a little bit about the pre-interview process. How do you have any thoughts or suggestions around how you go about recruiting people when there isn't an existing market for a technology or
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole like 3-hour workshop on how to do that. But so it's interesting. There's a lot you can do online, for example. You can, I mean, I kind of call it cyber stalking, but if you pick, say you have a job performer in a playing field, you can say use LinkedIn. I do a lot of LinkedIn, and there are lots of LinkedIn groups and out there that can line up with some of that. And you can subscribe to those. You can read the posts, and maybe then you find people through LinkedIn that have the job titles that would line up with the job performers that you're interested in, for example. And then you kind of, yeah, I did not officially say cyber stalk, but but you can monitor what they say online and to understand better, like, what vocabulary do they use? How do they talk about a particular problem? And then, once you can get a good feel for that, then you can potentially reach out and say, I really liked your post about X, Y, and Z. Um, and that could, I mean, in some cases that could lead to, hey, let's have coffee. Like I was talking to someone I was mentoring last week, and that's exactly what happened. Like
Yeah.
they they reached out to someone with a very particular, comment that really reflected that they understood their perspective and their point of view, and it resulted in, hey, let's have coffee to talk about this more. So I think there's a lot you can do, and it could be LinkedIn, it could be like Facebook groups, it can be other things too, but it can, there's a lot online that can bridge those gaps.
And are these folks, do they typically have some sort of existing expertise in the space?
Um, you mean like the entrepreneurs?
Or well, when you're recruiting, like, are you looking at
Oh,
people?
yeah, if they would have expertise in that particular job, focus job.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. We're at the top of the hour, so I just want to take a moment. Tanya, thank you so much for presenting this work. You have a very skilled way of taking a lot of complex information and boiling it down into a way that is not only easily understandable, but also entertaining. Like there's so many great things that you said that I was kind of just went ahead and took notes on the whole event because I don't normally do quite so much. But I was just like, oh, this is all great. So thank you so much. Everyone, thank you so much for joining on this
Yeah, thank
short
you.
after the holiday. It's really wonderful to talk to everyone and see everyone's face. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank
the
you.
opportunity. It was fun.